the early stages of everyone forgetting that Expedition 33 even came out. I'm seeing a lot of people try the game out and dropping it within less than an hour. I'm seeing plenty of people call it overrated. I'm seeing plenty of people point out the fact that it's not an indie game and that there are far better JRPGs out there. There have been all these copes regarding Expedition 33 over the past several years. And one of my favorites is this idea that, well, what JRPG have you played in the past 5 years that's better than Expedition 33 Clair Obscur? And there are just several examples. Initially I came up with Yeast, I came up with Trails, I came up with Tales of Arise. I came up with so many JRPGs that were better than it. And honestly, it took me a while to kind of process that what Nintendo RPG was better than Expedition 33. Because, Nintendo RPGs tend to be quite a bit radically different than most JRPGs. A lot of people would even argue that Pokemon isn't even really a JRPG in the traditional sense because it's so wildly different and has its own distinct personality, vibe, and tone. But I consider Pokemon an RPG, and I consider it one of the greatest games of all time. And that was my initial reaction was that well, Pokemon is better. And it kind of dawned on me over time just how much better games like Mario and Luigi Brothership and various other Nintendo RPGs actually are. But I actually settled on something, something made in the past 3 years, something that is gaining more and more fans, something that I've played recently and kind of fallen in love with to the point where I consider it within my top 10 Nintendo games. Something that I think far surpasses Expedition 33 in every single way, shape, and form. And that is, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And it kind of dawned on me that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is an example of a game that this is what actual and the reception to an actual classic RPG looks like. Because this is the thing that bothers me about Expedition 33, and I think a lot of other JRPG fans is that you have this, confirmation right out of the gate that oh, this is the greatest game ever made, this is the greatest game of the year, this is the greatest RPG in decades, it's just as good as Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, and if you're a fan of RPGs, you're just sitting there thinking about all of the great RPGs you've played over the past 30 years that have never become mainstream, that aren't actively talked about, that aren't within mainstream circles. I'm playing Ben Kaido's Origins right now on stream. One of my favorite games of all time, my personal favorite RPG. I don't even know if that game became a million seller. I doubt it. That game is super niche and they never put out a sequel, but it is still one of my personal favorite RPGs ever. Came out in 2006, amazing GameCube game, all-time classic in my mind, but it wasn't super commercially successful and it's not something that people actively talk about or play today. uh, it dawned on me that that is the typical reaction to a new RPG. Even if it's very, very good, this is a genre that can take 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours to get through. And as a result of that, it takes a long time for people to play through these games, even if you genuinely like them. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I bought day one and unfortunately was not able to beat it until a couple of years later when I finally got the time to get it off the shelf and pop it in and play it. And then it became one of my all-time favorites on Switch, right? It was interesting looking at how I gradually, over time, began to love Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and its characters and its setting and its world, and really started to appreciate everything it does. That is not something you saw with Expedition 33. In fact, you saw the exact opposite, where even before the game came out, you were having YouTubers release these crazy narratives about how this game was unlike anything else we had ever seen, and how this was the best RPG, how this was going to be game of the year worthy. And it's just I know who you people are, okay? Like, I know you don't play games like this, you know? I know you have no credibility when it comes to evaluating and reviewing RPGs. Like, why should I ever take you seriously in regards to this topic, you know? And like, it's becoming more and more apparent to me, you know, the more you see people like talk about Expedition 33, that it is very clearly people who don't play RPGs who are glazing this game and hyping it up. You know, it is clearly people who don't play RPGs, who have no intention of playing more RPGs, who are glazing this game and calling it the greatest game ever for doing very basic, very simple things that any other JRPG can do. Like, it's getting to the point where JRPG fans are addressing the fact that if Expedition 33 had an anime aesthetic, nobody would care about it. You know, it is the Unreal Engine 5 game of that genre, you know, with its weird pseudo like realistic look. It's embarrassing, honestly. And that's kind of my mindset, you know, looking at this and like looking at like the fans and how they're acting right now, is that like if this was an RPG that had any kind of relevancy to it, you would be seeing people play it for the next 20 years. You know, you would be seeing people talking about it 20 years later. You know, I played Tales of Symphonia for the first time this year, and that came out in 2003. You know, like Expedition 33, I think, in spite of all the hype, all the publicity, it just doesn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny at all. You know, it's not really an indie game. It's not that good. It's certainly not the best RPG ever. Like, it really does feel as if like the YouTube community is gassing this game up because of sponsorships and shilling. You know, like this is just what they do. Like every time a big new game from a big publisher comes out, and yes, Expedition 33 is a big game from a big publisher. It is not an independent produced. It is not an independent product. Every time this happens, these guys are just there to glaze it because without them, like this game just has no illusion of success. This game has no illusion of popularity. We were told that this game was obviously going to sweep because nothing that came out this year was as good or popular, and yet in reality, you know, I'm sitting here thinking that like, you know, I think Pokemon Legends EA was better. You know, I'm sitting here thinking that, you know, so many other Nintendo games this year were better. And of course, when it comes to like, you know, wider JRPGs, you know, Nintendo did not put out any RPGs this year, but like when it comes to like, you know, the wider world of RPGs, I can name like several titles that I would be interested in before this, you know. Like Final Fantasy Tactics is like 25 years old, you know, and I still think it's better than this, you know. So when you take that into consideration, when you think of like how many better RPGs are on Nintendo Switch, you really have to stop and wonder like why exactly would I ever be interested in Expedition 33? And the simple fact of the matter is like any serious fan of the genre has legions of other games to get through before they would even consider Expedition 33. And Expedition 33 just cannot hold up to any kind of scrutiny whatsoever.